When I think about the word treasure, the only thing I can think of are my 2 daughters. I thought I was going to get through this without crying, but that song earlier, Lord. Okay, the moment I became a parent, I knew that parenting was the thing for me. I didn't know that. I'm not necessarily good at it, but oh my God, I love it. It was the thing I would work hardest at, the thing that would be the hardest for me to work on. There are many amazing things about being a parent, and a few bad ones too. But the worst thing about being a parent for me is that I almost never know whether I'm making the right choice. The choices that I want to make will help my children be kind and thoughtful and gentle. The choices that will help my children be better children and adults and parents and coworkers and bosses and people. Sometimes, however, I do see how my choices affect my daughters. And sometimes it breaks my heart. Two years ago, on a beach on Florida's Panhandle, I had an epiphany. This is about halfway through my journey towards becoming a credentialed religious educator, and I had just finished working on some heavy introspective work. You know, the kind that helps you understand how you came to where you are and how to get through it in a long-term way so that you don't burn out. The piece I had been working through most recently was the ramifications of my conflict management style. Now, when you look up conflict avoidance in a dictionary, you might find my picture. And I could have told you that going in, at least the surface things, right? I could have told you that I am not the person that's going to walk up to somebody and ask them a question. I am not the person who enjoys being around people who are unpredictable. I would rather be uncomfortable than cause conflict. But what I didn't realize until I did this work was that a host of other things that I had going on really tied back to this avoidance. I'm a control freak. I control everything around me, and my children hate it. But honestly, that's not the worst thing. I'm a perfectionist. I was thinking of this, Sally, as you were telling your story. When my children were little, they would hand me sticks because they loved sticks. And I told them, they still believe this, that I had jumping stick disease, which is when the stick touches your hand, it has to jump out. They do this now to show their cousins that they're not lying. But for me, perfectionism is all about the idea that if I don't make any mistakes, there's nothing for anyone to criticize, right? The dictionary has a much harsher definition. Perfectionism is a disposition to regard anything short of perfection as unacceptable, especially including the setting of unrealistic, demanding goals, accompanied by a disposition to regard failure to achieve those goals as unacceptable and a sign of personal worthlessness. Perfectionism is a trap. At its base, it's the belief that we can earn love. Earn respect, earn happiness. Now, from an employer standpoint, a little bit of perfectionism isn't a bad thing. Really don't like sending things out with like misspelled words. But the best benefit to perfectionism I have found is that it gives me a foolproof answer when someone asks me what my biggest weakness is, and then they think I'm kidding. But the downside to perfectionism is that it forces me to focus on things that don't really matter. So back to our story. Last spring, we were able to stay in a beach house on the Florida Panhandle with my father and his wife and her daughters and their families. It was a rather full house, and I was particularly stressed out. So Sarah and I often went out in the evening to collect shells. We had a plan. The plan was to collect tiny shells to put in Christmas ornaments that we could then give to people as gifts. But for some reason, well, I guess we do know the reason now, don't we? I thought those shells had to be perfect. They had to be completely intact, and that was the most important thing. Occasionally, I would pick up stunning pieces and show them to Sarah and then drop them because they weren't perfect. And I'd love to tell you that it was only a few of them before I recognized what was happening, but it wasn't. It was many and many, until finally Sarah did the same thing. And I had this epiphany, thinking, what in the heck? This piece that she picked up was so beautiful that she had to call me over to show it to me, and then she just drops it. Before that moment, I thought that my problems, my issues, my worries weren't negatively affecting my children. I came to an abrupt, hitting a wall moment of realization that I was transferring strategies that worked really well to get me through my childhood to my kids that luckily don't have the same issues as children that I did. They have their own issues. So I was transferring these strategies, and they were taking them on as if they were fact. This is just the way that you live. And I know from firsthand experience that perfectionism leads to anxiety, depression, procrastination, and often gets in the way of long-lasting relationships. I'm doing what I can to end my own perfectionism, accepting that there's usually a middle ground between what I see as the end goal and what I see as possibly acceptable. Accepting, trying to set realistic standards, asking for help, and taking time to be mindful of my choices. This is important for me as a person, but it's even more important as a parent. What I did in that moment on the beach was stop and think and decide that beauty was more important than perfectionism. That evening and the next, Sarah and I collected many more utterly beautiful shells and barnacles and crab claws, and she touched a squid and screamed. She really wanted me to say that. When we got home, Sarah decided to scrap the whole plan, and she put everything in a container with some sand that we had brought home. So now it's a reminder of our trip, but it's also a reminder to me daily that this is something I need to work on. This is this has been a lifelong journey to get to where I am and how good I am at perfectionism, and I need to back away slowly. It's like a war where I can only sometimes notice the battles after they're done and I've already lost. But now we have this collection of perfect and imperfect and beautiful shells on display in our living room as a reminder. And I am so grateful. Thank you.